AI is changing knowledge work faster than most people realize. The cost of intelligence is collapsing, which means estimating, scheduling, and planning, the knowledge-driven parts of construction, are becoming automated. And if your edge has been we execute better, that edge is disappearing. So what actually matters now? Sean Devine is the CEO of XBE, and he argues that leadership in construction isn't about managing tasks anymore. It's about seeing uncertainty, seeing multiple possible futures, and positioning your company to succeed no matter what happens. We break down why vision is the new competitive edge, why specialization is turning into a liability, and why trust, not just data, is becoming the most valuable asset in business. And if you're a construction company owner who's spent years building a business on execution, we talk about whether you need to adapt or even sell your company. This conversation has a ton of vision in it, and it's a clear look at what's happening in the world as AI is coming in greater and greater ways to impact construction. And it's all about how to make sure that you're ready for that world. So let's get right into it. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Sean, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Just before we start, I know that before we hit record, you told me you're in San Francisco. Please tell the audience why you're in San Francisco today.
And my wife and I decided at the last minute we would take our 9-year-old twins to NBA All-Star Weekend here in San Francisco. In fact, for my birthday last year, my wife got us a trip to Indianapolis to go to All-Star Weekend. And we had such a good time. I think we were looking for an excuse to redo the experience. So here we are.
That's great. That's great. What was your favorite thing about the last All-Star Weekend that you went to?
I think my favorite thing isn't even going to be NBA related. We went to the concert at All-Star Weekend and a number of acts, but one of them was Keith Urban.
Oh, really?
And we ended up, it had to have been 5 feet from him, like right next to him for the entire concert. He was, face to face. It's pretty thrilling to be near someone that's that talented and that famous, both in that they seem sort of otherworldly in some ways, but also very human in other ways. And that kind of juxtaposition was fun. And then right after, one of the guys that performed, I'm forgetting his name. He's the guy that sings the theme song to Applebee's. Forgetting his name. But anyways, he was a country singer. He ended up being in line with us to get into the All-Star game with his family right afterwards. And so we got to know him a little bit. So a bunch of interesting musical moments that I didn't expect.
That's interesting. Now, are you a fan of Keith Urban?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not on his super fan list, but I'm a fan. I listen to his music. He's a spectacular guitarist, kind of.
Is he really?
Impossibly good.
Wow.
Impossibly good guitarist. And I always find that fun that, almost anyone that's that famous is way better than you think they are. And he flexed that muscle pretty aggressively during the show.
Yeah, I think that's amazing when you're in the presence of someone who is, in a certain way, transcendent when it comes to human ability. It is kind of an amazing thing to think about. But then it's interesting, when you saw that human aspect, what did you see about him that was human that caught your attention?
Well, he's a couple of things. He's some mix of extremely pretty and aging.
Yeah, right.
I think that's his brand to some degree, but when with your own eyes from literally a few feet away, you kind of see him not just in the sort of picture perfect moments, but in all the moments, he somehow simultaneously felt, because he's a bit older than I am, he felt aging like I am, and also not, sort of ethereal almost. And I found that combo to be interesting. I sort of I sympathized a little bit in the challenge that it would be to try to ride that wave, right? Because every year that goes by, it's a little harder to be pretty if you're him, I think. And so that was pretty fun. He's also kind of a little guy, and
interesting.
That's often true with famous folks, which makes sense, right? It'd be quite the coincidence that he'd also be 6'5".
Right.
Given that so few people are 6'5". So he's a little guy, and there's something about that I found kind of entertaining too.
That's cool. 9-year-old twins. Are we talking identical twins? Are we talking?
They are not identical. No,
Okay.
They are different sizes, different vibes, but born at the same time.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, let's dive into the meat of the conversation here. You have some thinking that you've done around what you call the coming deflation knowledge work. What do you mean by that as it relates to the construction industry?
Yeah, sure. So I think about this a lot in general. And then I think that last year, with the huge attention on inflation that had sort of swept the country and was a big part of the conversation politically around the election, it was very interesting to me that that was the case, given that I think we're on the precipice of the largest amount of deflation that matters to American workers and the American economy that we've ever seen. And I suspect that when we look back in 10 years, notwithstanding some of the uncertainty around tariffs, that we'll look back and say, unbelievable, we were focused on inflation at the moment that costs were about to drop by so much for knowledge work. And given that the American economy has shifted so much to knowledge work over the years, relatively at least, it's a pretty big deal, both for people individually in their own sort of professional lives, as well as for companies and in sectors. And so what I mean by deflation, I'm going to refer to some stats that I think came out last week related to the cost of intelligence. And so we are now in year, I don't know, maybe 6 of it being clear that the cost of a given amount of artificial intelligence, but I'll just say a given amount of intelligence, that the cost of intelligence drops by an order of magnitude every year. And that's not, it's sort of like it rhymes with Moore's Law. It's not Moore's Law. It's a different phenomenon, but what cost $1 in, 2 years ago costs a penny today in terms of the cost to generate the token, being the unit of intelligence we're going to use. Sort of a token of intelligence now is a penny that was $1. And next year it's going to be a tenth of a penny. So that's sort of point one. And then point two is that if it was the case that artificial intelligence was staying constant, that wouldn't be that big of a deal because it only would be applicable to some amount of knowledge work. That's not true. The amount of intelligence that is available artificially is going up as a sort of log of the resources that are used to train. And so what that means is that given that the cost per unit of intelligence is going down by an order of magnitude every year, that even if we don't add any compute resources, that means that the amount of intelligence that's created artificially goes up at a constant rate, right? Because the cost per unit goes down by an order of magnitude. And so given that it's the log of those resources, it's going to be constant. And so even if we weren't investing more resources into compute, both for training and inference, we're seeing either a dramatic reduction year over year in the cost for a given intelligence. And given that what's capable of with existing artificial intelligence models is so good, that's very meaningful, right? I mean, every year the cost going down by an order of magnitude, we don't really have a frame of reference for that in the rest of our professional lives. But the percentage of knowledge work that can be done by models is continuing to go up at a fairly predictable rate, because we understand how the input resources compute into training and inference converts into intelligence, and those compute resources are getting more efficient, and we're adding a huge amount of them, right? So even if we weren't doing that, this would be a big deal. But then we're adding orders of magnitude, or let's say an order of magnitude of compute resources right now. And so that means that instead of just sort of riding the wave of increased efficiency, sort of compounding into more and more intelligence, we're also multiplying it by the increase in resources. And so all of that creates two outcomes. One is that the percentage of knowledge work that can be done via artificial intelligence models, not just that are being asked by people, but that are sort of agentically figuring out the plan of attack and doing the work, that's going up rapidly, and the cost to do it is going down rapidly. And so those two parameters, I think, are pretty easy to see what's going to happen, which is the amount of work that can be done by machines is going to go up as fast as you can imagine, and that the cost of that simultaneously is going to drop. And that means that if you're riding the exponent, so to speak, right, you're sort of riding that curve, you're going to see the cost of knowledge work and the effectiveness of knowledge work, which I think is underestimated. Costs go rapidly down and the effectiveness go rapidly up. And there'll be sort of two classes of organizations and people, those that are riding that exponent and sort of taking advantage of the dramatic deflation in the cost for intelligence and absorbing more of capability into their work, and those that don't. And if it was a sort of gradual, like linear climb, then that'd be fine, right? We sort of just notice the impact and sort of adjust to it as it went. But with the exponential curve, it's, these sort of the implications of that could be just jarring and sudden. And so when I think about deflation, it's am I positioned as an individual and am I positioned as a company to benefit or at least not get hurt from the rapid change in those two parameters?
So let's dive into that then. What are the implications of this for a construction company, understanding that there's a portion of a construction company's work that is knowledge work, and then there is a portion of it, and a large portion of it, that is practical or, hands-on, obviously putting the work in place, which has an element of knowledge to it, but there's still a part of it which will never be knowledge work, or is unlike, or that portion that there's always going to be something that people are doing with their hands at some point. So what are the implications for a construction company as they're thinking through how they should be positioning themselves in terms of the way that they do their work and the way that they position their company strategically for the future?
Yeah, so I think I would introduce a simple idea here, which is to think about the work that you do in your company. Think about what portion of the work contributes to your competitive advantage. And that while sort of measured by dollars and hours, the work that the crews are doing is the majority, the largest single sort of bucket of effort. So that's the case. But when you think about the contributions to competitive advantage, that is quite a different story, in that most of the competitive advantage comes from the knowledge work. And specifically, I mean a few areas. So that's in estimating. So it comes from estimating. It comes from planning and scheduling, and it comes from continuous improvement. It comes from CapEx, sort of buying the right things. And it's not only that set of things, but I mean, if we were stack ranking, those four would be in the top 5 for sure. And the difference between companies as it relates to the work that the crews are doing, I'd say is predominantly actually about the equipment that they have, right? So like their people's time, and I'm talking about mostly horizontal construction where the machines are doing the majority of the actual movement of material, so to speak. So that is more of a CapEx question. Actually, like, are you buying the things that are right and putting them in the right places? And then on the crew capability side, it's obviously very important, right? I mean, it all could be for naught if you screw up there, but those are mostly downside considerations, not sources of competitive advantage, mainly.
Yeah.
And so when I think of knowledge work, it's true that it's from an income statement, not the majority of the cost, but it is contributing the majority of the competitive advantage, or contributing to the opportunity cost of not having competitive advantage. And so, if I'm an owner of the company, most of my time should go to thinking about that particular problem, which is, are we advantaged or disadvantaged as it relates to the thinking and the execution in those areas that I just mentioned?
Okay, so then one of the big problems that a lot of people have is that they see this coming, and yet I have this project that I've signed for today, and I need to execute that project because if I don't, it's going to have a detrimental effect on my business. And so they have to balance today's work with tomorrow's potential work, and the way that we're doing work today with the way that we could be doing work tomorrow. How would you advise a CEO to negotiate or navigate that sort of difficulty there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think primarily my advice would be this is when you have to lean on your executives or managers that are responsible for the day-to-day to mind that ship, right? Like to get that work right.
Yeah.
So that the people at the very top, I'm talking ownership and top executives, can be looking ahead and saying, are we ready to ride the exponent in these different areas? Because you're right, on a given project, there's not time to ask these questions. Right. One needs to actually just execute today to get to tomorrow. But when you get to tomorrow, you have to be ready to take advantage of it. And no one but the top of the company is going to have that perspective. And so if they're caught sort of executing on the projects, they're not going to be able to take the time to think about how they're going to, how they could possibly get stuck on any of these ledges.
And I think that's another element of construction that's so challenging, is that I'm not in isolation as a contractor. I have project partners and I have owners, and I have project partners who are at different stages of both development and thinking along these lines, and also owners who are interested in one thing, and that's getting the project built as quickly, safe, and cheaply, and with as much quality as possible. And so I'm in this tremendously complex environment, which lends itself to me to inertia, in other words, and not making progress. And so how should a construction company owner position themselves to begin to have those conversations, not only internally, but then externally with project partners and owners, so progress can be made?
There's a bit of an abstract answer to that question, but here we go. So I think that it's important to lean into the uncertainty, right? And to say, like, if I'm the owner, say, like, I don't know exactly how things are going to go, either with each of those partners or just economically in general, et cetera, over the next period of time. Right? Like, I don't know. And I don't know can lead to one of two outcomes. Either I'm going to wait until I know to do anything.
Yes.
That's one strategy, which I think is a reasonable strategy for plenty of situations. The second strategy is I'm going to position myself to benefit in all parts of the curve, right? Because it's the case that if you don't act now, then the context changes quite a bit in terms of availability of intelligence and cost of intelligence, right? Those two things.
Yep.
So if those two things change and I haven't done anything, I only win in the part of the distribution. I mean, I only won if things didn't change. And if things did change, I really get hurt pretty badly, right? Because people are going to bid smarter than I am. They're going to collaborate smarter than I am. They're going to schedule smarter than I do, et cetera.
Yep.
And so what I would do is not put all of my eggs in a basket that says, I know what's going to happen, but rather I want to optimize against the distribution of outcomes to say, like, whether this sort of, the curve remains exponential in the areas we talked about before, or it changes. Either way, I do okay. Right. And so that's not saying like I'm going to shift everything to things changing in 6 months exactly. No, that's irresponsible too, because now you've optimized for a different part of the curve. And none of us have a crystal ball. We don't understand the dynamics of how this is all going to play out.
Right.
But I think we can be confident in uncertainty, right? Which is like, hey, what I know is that a lot is possible. A lot more is possible in the near term than has ever been the case in my lifetime. And so as the leader, we want to, instead of optimizing for an outcome, we want to optimize for the outcomes, for the whole set of them. And so when I do that, then I'm not actually terribly concerned about which part of the distribution ends up being reality, because I have sort of become anti-fragile, right? I have like organized myself so that the chaos of the next couple of years will benefit me because I'm ready for whichever way it's going to go. And I think that takes a lot of strength as a leader, because, leaders oftentimes are looked to for knowledge. And what I'm saying is that knowledge is probably the enemy here. Belief in knowledge as the key thing is the enemy. What we have to believe in is uncertainty, that we don't actually know for sure, that we just know that there are a lot of possibilities that matter. And as long as we're ready to take advantage of whichever way it goes and or not be hurt by it at the very least, we stand to gain relatively from that uncertainty against others.
If you struggle with micromanaging, if your calendar is out of control, if you can't communicate effectively, if you suck at running meetings, I have a solution for you, and it's my course, The Shift. The Shift is all about how to shift from building projects to becoming a manager and leader of people. Go to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com. Check out everything about the course. It's fully online. It is self-paced, and it is 100% guaranteed. Tons of leaders from different construction companies have taken the principles that I teach in The Shift and have used them to transform the way that they lead. And I promise you, in fact, I guarantee you that it will transform the way that you lead. And if you are not convinced of that after taking the course, you just email me, eric@constructiongenius.com. I'll give you all your money back. So it's 100% guaranteed. You have nothing to lose. Go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today. All right, back to the conversation with Sean. As you look into your crystal ball and we think of things like estimating, planning, scheduling, continuous improvement, the CapEx, understanding there is uncertainty, where do you see the major changes happening in the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. Let's walk through the list then. Right.
Yeah.
So let's start with estimating.
Yep.
Couple things. So I think as it relates to information availability, because I think estimating, has a few steps. So first is what information is available about both what my costs will be, who else will bid, what their costs will be relatively, what the market demand is going to be, therefore what supply demand balance is going to be. All of that, which right now is either like quite uncertain or, known in parts, or maybe one company has a bit of an advantage because of their, experience or wisdom or access to information or some such thing. All of those advantages are going away. And I think that if, this is a very sort of practical point, but for example, if you use the deep research feature from ChatGPT now to research any topic that you care about, it is shockingly good already, like shockingly, incredibly good. And that's the worst it'll ever be. And it's obvious it's going to improve at a very rapid rate because they can pour sort of more compute on two things. One, the sort of collection of information from available sources, both public and non-public, and then the synthesis of that information into sort of the output. So I think that there are many companies that have benefited from arbitrage on that information. And literally we're months away, I think, from that being like a fairly easy query away, being a commodity.
Yeah.
Now, the dynamics, back to sort of leaning into uncertainty, that's all stuff that you could just know. Like if you had infinite time, you could research and know. And right now, if people had infinite time, they could research and know those things. They just don't, and they're about to have access to it. I think that the other side of that coin, though, which is like, okay, what will people do? Because pricing is about understanding from the customer standpoint what they value, and from the competitor standpoint what their alternatives are, and the customer standpoint what their alternatives are. And so, like understanding those dynamics. Right? Like for yourself, like if I don't get this deal, what am I going to do with my resources? If the competitors don't get this deal, what are they going to do with their resources? How do the customers value? Do they understand what their options are? That kind of seeing the future and sort of imagining how all of the sort of simulating how the negotiation could go, and then positioning yourself to, again, be the winner in the percentage of the time that you're comfortable with given your alternatives and the consequences of losing. I feel like there's a lot of innovation that's going to come there, which is sort of the use of information that's going to become a commodity to see all the futures that could exist and position yourself again to win in most of them, or the largest percentage you could. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation around that. I think that there will be some opportunity to differentiate and have competitive advantage in how well you were, again, not collecting what's known from the past, but imagining what could be in the future and then sort of selecting the right strategy based on all those futures. That's pretty near term. I think that in the next 6 to 18 months, we're going to see a lot of movement on both sides of that equation I just described.
Let me ask you this then. So with the deflation of knowledge, availability of the information, the processing power that the AI has, inferences it can draw, we're not going to take the perspective, at least I'm not, that this is anti-human thing that is terrible or anything like that. But I'm wondering then, what part is left for the human beings to do with all of that information? And the reason I'm asking this is because not only do we need to think about where the technology is going, I need to think about, from a human perspective, what types of people should I be bringing into my organization to use that information most effectively? And what am I looking for in them that will give me a competitive edge?
Yeah, so start by saying I don't know. And the reason I say I don't know, and I'll end up answering the question more interestingly than that, but I'll start with I don't know, in that if you had told me 4 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe even, but certainly 4, I think 3, I'm right at the edge of if this would have been true, but 4, I'm not, that software development would be a complete commodity in the next 6 years, I'm telling you, that did not seem like it was what was going to happen. I mean, think about all the conversations that you had or other people had about your children or about yourself, thinking like, I wish I had gone and become a software engineer. Or
Yeah,
if I
learn to
could only
code, right?
if I could only convince my kid to learn to code instead of whatever it is. And then it turns out that was totally wrong. It was
Yes.
totally wrong. And that was a handful of years ago. Now, this is coming from someone that I can code. I'm an engineer.
Right.
And to see that the things that took me like decades to get good at literally don't matter anymore. They're complete commodities. Like, and I've witnessed it. Like, I think maybe I'm in a good spot on this one because I, also run a company and also do other things that I, don't feel terribly attacked by this reality. It's true. And so I'm just going to come into this answer with a lot of humility and that, man, I'm pretty up on this stuff. And I still didn't see how quickly that would be true. And that's not a prediction. That's already happened. Now, the question I'm asking myself then is like, what do I take from that experience to answer this question? And I think I'd say the following. Any specialization is a problem. So I think we have hit peak specialization in our lifetime. The humans will be less specialized tomorrow than they are today.
Give me an example of specifically, what do you mean by specialization?
Like, I am the estimator that knows how to estimate heavy civil jobs that for private developers.
Yeah.
Like, that's my specialty.
Yeah.
Or I'm the software developer that works on the front end of code. Anything that's like, I'm that guy, gone.
Yeah.
That, like, we are way peak specialization already, but the sort of rapid descent down that specialization mountain is going to be stark. So lawyers that specialize in IP, I could go on and on and on this point.
Yes. Yeah.
What I see consistently being valuable still, like what has stood the test of the early part of this sort of these exponential curves, like now that we're starting to go vertical, are people that are generalists with good taste. And so I want to separate those two ideas. So generalist is like people that are good at everything.
You mean like the Rick Rubins?
I mean, Rick Rubin he certainly has good taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so I think that like the valuable people are those that define themselves as not in one area actually, but that they have a very small identity that can absorb a huge range of tasks. That keep your identity small idea from Paul Graham from years ago. I've recommended this article a million times. It's never been more true in that having a very, very small core, these concrete list of things that you believe in that really doesn't extend too far about yourself is really critical. And in fact, I think that uncertainty, if people that believe at their core, one particular paradox, which is both that God is uncertainty, that there is some of the most important things that affect our lives and work are unknowable. Like you can't know it's not possible to know them. Not that if we had all the information all the time in the world that we would know them. They aren't knowable. Okay, so that's part one of the paradox. But part two of the paradox is that knowledge itself is infinite. In other words, there is no limit to the knowledge we can create. It's just that infinite knowledge doesn't include some of the most important things. And if you have that, if someone has that idea in their core, which is that I can't know everything, but what I can know is infinite, and a small identity that creates sort of a pretty small, I don't know if that creates a small identity, but that plus having a small identity of, sort of general skill and not specialization.
Let me ask you a question about that. Is that why intuition is so important? Because intuition is our doorway beginning to grasp some of that which is unknowable, even if it's just for a moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think intuition is either cope, like it's not, like I don't think it's a good explanation, or it's good. So where I think intuition is great is when someone means by intuition that it's not knowable. And so we have to have some sort of faith in the uncertainty and pick a choice that is robust or ideally anti-fragile against that uncertainty. When someone means that by intuition, I really like it. Like, in other words, like their gut understands that the future isn't determined and it can't be known. And therefore I want to choose based on my experience of uncertainty reigning in my life. I want to choose things that are going to hold up to the distribution of uncertain outcomes. I think sometimes people mean when they say intuition, they kind of are referring to that sense of the sort of stochastic nature of it all. And I like that. Sometimes people mean like, I don't want to put the work in.
No.
And so I don't like that part, but I like the former part.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of, so for instance, when it comes to this knowledge, I'm assuming we do get to the point with the power of these technologies that it begins to take away choice from us because it's making the choices for us, and those are the right choices. But at a certain point, I'm brought to a point of decision where I have to choose between one of two things, let's say, or one of many things. And that's where what I'm calling intuition or taste, you could even call it taste. That's where the taste comes in, right? And that's where you have to have a combination of both conviction and humility about your taste.
That's right.
Especially in construction, I'm thinking, I have to have conviction, but then I also have to be able to bring it into the realm of the project team and have the discussion.
Yeah. You could just take using a construction example that I think is like very plain, but also makes the point well. Just think about like how choices about canceling a given job day, like whether we're going to work on this job tomorrow.
Yeah.
Think about that choice
and
how the right way to make that choice is to sort of see the future, not in terms of what's going to happen, but what could happen. Like, so for example, let's say there's a 10% chance that a storm pops up in the first 4 hours of the job that causes the rest of the day to be canceled. Now, even if I don't think that's going to happen, if it could happen and, maybe it could happen and it's highly uncertain, then I'm like, okay, in the cases that it does happen in the distribution, I lose significant money because I have to pay, the crew a 7-hour minimum or some such thing, right? The crew and the trucks. And then you start to say like, well, what's the consequence of pushing that day to another day? Are the opportunity costs high? Is that going to jack with other schedules or the liquidated damages? Or do we actually have the capacity to absorb in our like weaker backlog than ideal, so to speak? And if we do, then we shouldn't take any risk, right? We should be really, really reluctant to ever send the crew out if there's any chance that something's going to go wrong, given that the cost of moving it's low and the possibility of losing out on scheduling something, there could be a shower early is not nothing. And so
Right.
like that kind of humility in the face of that kind of decision making, I think that the machines could also do that thinking. So it's not like I think that that's inherently human, but for any given moment, like for today, that's the human part.
Well, let me ask you this. What is inherently human that the machines won't replace?
I think ambition, fundamentally. So the machines don't have a will to live. I mean, could reduce sort of ambition down to that simple idea.
Very
right?
good.
That there's something fundamental in humans. I think actually humans isn't the point in life. That is the will to live.
Yes.
And I'm going to equate the 2 points.
Sure.
Machines don't have a will to live. They don't. And of all the things that I'm not really that confident that the machines have limits on many other areas, honestly, anymore.
Right.
But the will to live, I don't think that there's any evidence that machines have a will to live. They're not biological. Yeah, our genes have encoded in them that, well, I think that that's the goal of life is to keep living, right? To reproduce and keep living. And that sort of fundamental propulsive force is a pretty big difference, right? Because that's what sets the objective function. Like I obsess about the difference between interests and positions. Machines don't have an interest. They're given an interest. They take positions and they're great at it and they'll just be better. Humans have an interest, which is to stay alive and to reproduce. And that will to live, that ambition, I'm pretty confident is at the very least, a component of the difference. Maybe it's the whole difference. And if it
then
was the whole difference, it wouldn't even bother me necessarily.
How then does that lead us to living enhanced lives? If the machines are taking over, if I no longer have to grind out the code, so to speak, or grind out the estimate, how do then humans thrive in a situation where the work, the sweat of the brow, so to speak, is taken by the machines? What do we then do?
So, 2-part answer. I mean, if you sum up the work that's done by Americans right now.
Yes.
And say what percentage of that work was a job, so to speak.
Yep.
150 years ago.
Yes.
And you could do it at different points in time. 1 year ago, 10 years ago, 100, like all the different points in time. The percentage of the work that's done now that was done 150 years ago is very small now.
Yes.
Right. Most of the work we do is completely foreign to the very recent past, sort of biologically. Very recent past.
Yes.
And yet I don't think that it's the case. I mean, maybe some people would say that that sort of robbed us of our purpose or whatever, but I don't think most people would think that. I think most people think that their work has purpose, or certainly could.
I don't think we can even conceive of it really, because we're swimming in a completely different pond than we were.
That's right. And so this has happened. Now it's on a slightly slower timeline, right? But a pretty fast timeline historically. So 150 years is the blink of an eye.
Yes, it is.
Biologically. Now we're talking what took 150 years given the exponent, right? And the exponent's a big deal. That's why I keep coming back to it. The 150 years, maybe like 2 years, really, really exponents they look like a floor and then they look like a wall, right? Like they look flat and then all of a sudden it looks like you're hitting, a wall because they just go straight up. And so, that's the part that's different. So we have gone through the kind of change we're talking about in the recent past, right? In the recorded history of the U.S. Well, the U.S. is short-lived, right? And it's already happened to the U.S. So I think that the question is like, well, is it possible to replace what was meaningful work with new meaningful work that we couldn't have even envisioned? Yeah, it's already happened. So yes, that answer is yes. And we can just look to the past to know it. Now, that's not to say that I know, though, what meaningful work will be. I don't know. What I know is that knowledge is infinite and that there's no limit. There's never a point at which we have generated all of them, and generated, I'm saying on purpose there, right? Because knowledge isn't discovered, knowledge is created. We haven't at any point created all the knowledge that could be created because that's an infinite line. There's no limit to it. So, and given that it's not created yet, I don't know what it is. But what I do know is that we've gone through this before and it's fine. And I know that there's no limit to the knowledge that could be created, and that means that we're in for an interesting time period.
Hey, this is Eric. Quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is a great book. If you want simple, practical, no BS, hands-on, usable information to help you become a better leader, to help you to sell more effectively, to help you to develop strategies that you'll actually execute, then buy my book. $19.99 on Amazon. It's a killer deal. Get a copy for you and for all of your leaders. Read it. Discuss amongst each other how you're going to use and apply it. Take one principle a month and simply do that one principle in your business. For instance, the principles I teach on time management will absolutely revolutionize how you conduct your week. If you do that, it'll change the way you lead and it'll change your company as a result, because you know that your company is a direct reflection of your leadership. So buy the book on Amazon. Links are in the show notes. Let's get back to the conversation with Sean. So from a leadership perspective, I have a thought here I'd like to bounce off of you. If what sets a human being apart from a machine is what we're going to call ambition for the sake of the discussion, will the great companies in the future be led by people who understand human beings at that level and are able to articulate how human beings can tap into and then use that ambition in concert with the machines for the greatest possible output or productivity?
I will go one step further than that and say that the leader needs to directly provide the ambition most of the time.
Why'd you say that?
So faith is in short supply, and sort of ambition, sort of belief that we can thrive in the face of uncertainty. That's what faith is, right? I can thrive in the face of uncertainty.
Right.
That is both the superpower and raw material of greatness, and also elusive. And so I think that the leader's job is to be the sort of nuclear reactor of faith, that to say, like, I understand that you may not see. You may be afraid of what we can't see yet. And you're looking for purpose and answers and certainty. And what I will tell you is that faith is the answer, that we believe in the infinite possibilities of knowledge creation and all that could come from this moment. And that we don't have to know what the future is to benefit from it. We don't have to. Like, we can position ourselves to benefit from the uncertainty, ourselves, and then create a strategy that does so, right? That creates knowledge and that is well positioned against the uncertainty of the future. And not the main point I'm making there, sort of that's different from your question, is the leader can't delegate that particular responsibility to the team. They can't say, I have faith that you will. I think that, yeah, I mean, maybe that'll work if you have an incredible, better leader, below you. But I mean, mostly, I don't think that works. I think that you have to say, like, no, my job as the leader of whatever size organization it is to be the one with the most faith.
Yes.
And
so if you're going to have the most faith, perhaps you have to have the most vision then, right?
Absolutely true. Right. That's what vision is, seeing what isn't there. You have to see, and again, not a particular, I would say in the face of all this uncertainty now,
yeah,
it's not seeing a particular world, because that's going to be fragile. But to see sort of a distribution of possibilities that are going to benefit from the faster than expected and slower than expected progress in various areas.
It's interesting because there's a very common, everyone knows this, right? You have the visionaries and then you have the executors, right? And so as we're going forward in this timeline that we're describing here, that execution is more and more taken over by the machines. And so the premium is on that vision or that ability to see. Yeah, that's where the premium is.
You're totally right. So there's a speech, and I forget who gave it, but it's worth looking up. And if you have show notes, putting them in. Yep. There's a speech given recently about, I don't love gun analogies, but here we go. It is a gun analogy, and so I'm going to use it as he did. So execution's the bullets, right? So, and the bullets used to be all people, and now increasingly are machines,
yes.
and that is not going to change, right? So we have much more ammunition, to use this sort of an analogy, than we ever did before. And the ammunition cache is like rapidly increasing. What we don't have, or rather what that implies, is that you better have good guns.
Yes.
And guns are the vision. Guns are the leadership. And you don't need a lot of them, right? If you've got, one gun can do a lot of damage.
That's interesting.
And so this distinction between execution and leadership, or, call it ammunition and the gun, is very critical in that good or bad that can be done by those that are pointing the execution in a direction has never been higher.
Okay. So I'm leading a construction company. And if I look in the mirror, I know I'm an operator. I'm not a visionary. And I've built this company. I'm thinking of someone right now, billion-dollar company, started with very little and now has very much, but they're an operator. What should I do to position my company for the future if I know in my gut that I'm not the visionary, I am the operator?
It's a good question. I mean, it depends on this horizon, I suppose, in terms of your goals, right? So I think I'll just literally give my literal answer on this, so I think if I had a lot to lose, thinking of myself as the owner, and I really want to make that point, because my answer would be different if I was like the hired.
No. And we're thinking about the owner, yeah.
Okay, from the owner's perspective, I think that I would sort of do an assessment of what our competitive advantage comes from. And if I was an executor, but the organization's competitive advantage came from hard assets that are scarce, so that's particularly like land, permitting, things that there's a natural monopoly that can exist on them. Then if most of my competitive advantage actually was coming from these hard differentiated scarce assets, and I was just sort of an operator because that's all that's needed to make money when you've got those assets, I'd feel perfectly good. So I would just keep going, because those assets are not getting less differentiated. If my advantage came from my execution itself, so I didn't have differentiated hard sort of physical plant assets that were, scarce, but rather my advantage is just I was better at blocking and tackling, I would probably sell. Not to be too reductive, but it's a podcast.
That's good. So then let me ask one more question here. It's a cliche in construction that construction is a relationship business, right? At the end of the day, maybe I'm not in a hard bid environment. I'm in a negotiated environment. I'm looking at two numbers. I'm looking at two proposals. And I like this guy more than I like that guy. And so I'm going to give the job to this guy. Using that as a framework here, in the context of the deflation of knowledge, what is the premium on the ability of the leadership in companies to establish and maintain long-term relationships?
Well, maybe we can connect this to the previous part of the conversation about ammunition and guns. And that one way to see a relationship is that I trust you. I trust that I understand how you will handle situations. Said a different way, I trust that you are pointing the gun in the right direction, right? And that when things change, you will continue to point it in a reasonable direction. Like I trust that you will wield the gun correctly. I think that if I think that's a reasonable way to say it, then it would be the case that returns to relationships are going to go up significantly. And right, because the execution differences are practically speaking, going to not go to zero, but substantially decrease, right? And so having sort of faith that leadership of that execution is consistent with your expectations or your interests or whatever, I think ends up mattering more, right? Because that's all that's left.
Yes.
Right. Like two different companies are both going to be able to execute pretty well. And the question is on what? What are they working cross purposes or are they working, I think the belief in the value that people will find in positive sum people in relationships should go up, therefore, right? Because negative sum, you're going to the battles will be bloodier, right? Because the execution is going to be better on both sides. So I think that I'd be increasingly afraid of people that work cross purposes, and I'd be increasingly therefore seeking those that believe in positive sum outcomes and are willing to sort of synchronize our guns, synchronize the direction that we're pointing our execution.
So could we say then, just to try and summarize what we've talked about in a short phrase or two, that as we face this future of knowledge deflation, two things that are at a premium are the ability to see and believe, you could say, and then the ability to build trust and confidence.
Yeah, I think those 2 points are, and I think the C part, I have to emphasize the uncertainty bit.
Yes. Yeah.
See the uncertainty.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And because I think they vision, if it's too confident in itself, is just, a night out in Vegas.
Yes.
And,
No, that's fair enough. Yeah.
But yes, I think that's right.
So it's seeing the multiple possibilities and knowing that as we journey, some are going to fall away, some are going to become more clear, so to speak.
Yeah. Anytime you win, I think that this is a great, tactical tip as we close or get close to closing here. Anytime you win or you see someone else win. So for example, let's say a competitor does well.
Yes.
And you're trying to figure out, how do I feel about that? How do I feel about that competitor doing well? The question I ask myself is, what portion of the multiverse did they win in? In all the parallel universes that exist, are we existing in the one where they happen to have, red 52 come up?
Yeah.
Or did they actually have a strategy that won in the majority, won most of the time? It won in most of the multiverses. And if you sort of sum the outcome across the multiverse, and who I respect are people that have the highest score of summing the outcomes across the multiverse, in my estimation. Did they win most of the time? And I think that framing for yourself and others, which is am I making choices? Did I make choices that didn't just come up heads or tails, luckily, but that were robust and anti-fragile in the face of all the various possibilities that did exist or could exist? That's kind of the frame that I use that I think is quite helpful to use.
John, I know we could go much longer here, and this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your company, and how people can get in touch with you, please.
Yeah, sure, Eric. So, I'm the founder and CEO of a company named XBE, the letters XBE. We are a enterprise software company that provides an operations and business management platform to large horizontal construction companies. So think of vertically integrated road builders, people that own quarries and asphalt plants and ready-mix plants and crews and trucks and the rest of it.
Nice.
I started working on the company in 2016 and just grew it from scratch to where it is. We have about 40 large vertically integrated contractors that run their business on XBE. And our mission ultimately is to fully integrate the physical and financial perspectives of the business into one thought. And, that's always been our vision. But, now that we're 9 years in and have had quite a bit of success, you can actually see it.
So excellent. And the website is x-b-e.com.
That's right, x-b-e.com. And I'm available on the internet. You can find me if you search my name, Sean Devine. And I encourage anyone that's interested at any level in me or my business or the ideas that we've talked about to get in touch.
Okay, last question here as we're leaving here. What's your one parenting tip for parenting twins in case someone ever gets into that situation?
Well, I think it's going to be my same tip for if they weren't twins, but I'll give the tip that my wife used to make the early parts of having twins, like the first 2 years, really good, is we have older kids too.
Oh,
And reflected on our sort of experience parenting, and that there wasn't a time of the older kid's life that she didn't wish she could have back, like in hindsight. And, when you have twins, there are some difficult days early on just because it's a bit, it's just physically a demanding job, just in the most simple way. I mean that. And I think that having older kids taught us that, like, there isn't a time that you wouldn't want over, even the bad ones you'd want to do again. And so that it's kind of cute sounding, but I think actually worked. It kind of got us through the hard days, just in that we remembered all the time, like, however hard this is, I'll wish for it in the future. And I think that tip is pretty good for twins and parents.
Appreciate that, Sean.
Parents of twins.
Parents of twins. Yeah. That's awesome. Appreciate your time, Sean. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for listening to my conversation today with Sean, and I hope you enjoyed it. Quick favor to ask, please give the show a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the links in the show notes to get in touch with Sean. He's a very interesting guy, deep thinker on the things that will impact you the most in your construction business, whether you realize it or not. Share this interview with other people that you think would enjoy listening to it, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.